Today I will show you a sci-fi, romance, drama film from 2016, titled Passengers. Please like, subscribe and press the bell icon on all. The movie begins by showing a spaceship, the entire research team in the spaceship. All the passengers will wake up after 90 years of their sleep. The mission of this spaceship was to take this whole team to a planet like the Earth, in which it still has to go through a journey of 90 years. Since human age does not rise during such a lengthy travel, the entire team was housed in various devices. Those are referred to as sleeping quarters, where everyone was dozing off deeply. These devices were meant to protect the human body for 90 years. They won't be able to sleep until they get to another planet. As it proceeded, many asteroids passed in front of it. In other words, the spaceship is currently colliding with shattered rock fragments. However, this spacecraft was extremely powerful and advanced. Its self-repairing mechanism is triggered by collisions with asteroids. Despite the spaceship having some flaws, it fixes itself entirely. However, as a result of this incident, a passenger's sleeping chamber light came on. His chamber broke in the meanwhile. Robots began to move throughout his entire body. He awakens from his 30-year deep sleep after the spacecraft has been traveling for 30 years. Jin was his name. He stood up and went on. He was feeling lightheaded at first, but eventually he returned to normal. Jin now heads to the hall, where, upon arrival at the destination, all travelers were required to assemble in order to attend a conference. However, it was evident to him that nobody was in this hallway. He begins to search the entire spacecraft for the other passengers, but he only discovers himself. He proceeded to the control room in search of assistance, but found that it was locked and could only be unlocked with the ID of a control room employee or the team leader. Jim now receives information about his precise location from the system in order for him to determine the spaceship's current location, where he discovered that he is 90 years distant from that planet, his target. In other words, when he was awakened from his slumber 90 years ago, he felt rather let down. From there, he takes off. However, his gaze suddenly moved forward. He sensed the presence of a human being. Jim began traveling in that direction and discovered that he was actually a humanoid robot rather than a human. Jim now discovered a tool there and attempts to use it to mend his sleeping chamber, but he is unsuccessful in doing so. Jim then makes an attempt to enter the control room. He attempts to use the tools to chop through the door, but the door was quite sturdy. Because there was nothing that could be done, Jim saw that as time went on, the spaceship's other systems were also failing. However, he disregarded them and approached the robot. "I feel like I'm stuck in this spaceship forever," he began to say. "Nobody is going to assist me. Here, I will die by myself." When the robot hears this, it declares that these are human flaws. They constantly desire the things they like and lack. You ought to be content with what you already have. Jim is impacted by these things in some way. He began abusing them, hence whatever was within the spacecraft. He leads a contented life. The spaceship offered plenty of activities and games. Jim then devotes all of his time to everything. Then he lost his footing and was over. Abruptly, he caught sight of a sleeping chamber containing a girl. Aurora is her name. Jim enjoyed Aurora down there now that they were on firm ground. Consequently, he no longer spent his time watching the video of her interview. He now believes that I also wake Aurora up from sleep earlier than necessary. He was aware now that this was improper. Ultimately, though, he came to the conclusion that he would wake Aurora up. He starts trimming his hair now that he has a lot more hair and shaving. Then, with his toolbox, he enters Aurora's chamber. Using an instrument, he feeds current into her chamber system. This causes damage to the chamber and causes it to open. But before that, Jim grabs his toolbox and flees as her eyes open, and she looks at him. He stashes every tool away in order to keep Aurora from knowing that I have harmed her in this way. Aurora then awoke from her slumber and continued. Since she traveled in gold class, she never ate the same thing twice. Now that she was aware of that, Jim has been consuming the same food for a very long time, and she also feeds Jim food from her ID gold class. Aurora is now attempting to smash through the control room door. She is likewise unable to accomplish that. Aurora agrees that we are stuck here after realizing this. She now makes the decision to finish writing her book. Aurora then queries him, "Is there anything I can do for you?" Jim responds, "Yes, you can play and dance, and there are a lot of other things. Either an AI system teaches these folks to dance, or they choose to dance, which they begin to take pleasure in. They did a lot of dancing. They were both quite content. These folks are space travelers as well. They used to have a great time, and now they are gradually growing close." It was revealed that the spacecraft is now passing past a massive star, which gave it a really lovely appearance due to its extreme shine. Sparks come out of it like fire. Now, the next day, Jim, Pratt the robot and Aurora jointly celebrate Aurora's birthday. Jim wanted to give her a ring at this time so that she understands my feelings for you. However, the robot informs Aurora that Jim has removed you from the sleeping chamber during the chat, not that there was anything wrong with your chamber. Realizing this, Aurora broke out in tears. She breaks down in tears since the person she trusted the most turned on her. She stopped talking because she was so furious with Jim. Aurora approached him one night while he was asleep and gave him a hard punch since she was so furious. She intended to murder him after that, but she manages to gain self-control in some way. Jim acknowledges the following day that, indeed, he was mistaken. I awakened you from your slumber. I apologize, but I had nowhere else to turn. I'd gone insane 1 year from being alone. However, Aurora continues to ignore him even now. She becomes quite angry and yells at him. He was on the elevator the following day when it abruptly malfunctioned and stopped. It came to an end. Jim could not leave at this point. Now he opens the elevator and begins to exit with the assistance of his hands. On the other hand, there was a problem with the machine when Aurora went to use it to get food, due to the fact that it covers Aurora in food. Take a look at this. Neither of them realized what was going on. As they were contemplating this, a human voice could be heard. Upon their arrival, they discovered that the leader of their group from their sleeping chamber and awoke as well. The issue was discovered by the head as well. He then proceeds inside his RDC control room after unlocking the door, in order for him to investigate any other faults. However, he was unable to learn anything. These folks therefore make the decision that we shall investigate the spaceship's problems on our own. A robot lands on the three of them as they advance. However, it broke when it hit the ground. When the head notices this, it informs them that this is the 15th broken and damaged robot. The head now visits Aurora's bedroom to make sure. He discovered that Jim had unlocked it and caused damage. He receives no response from the head because he was also aware that a year spent alone can drive a person insane. Suddenly, the head began to feel ill. He discovered blood flowing from his mouth when he entered his room. Now, one night, the spaceship's light dims on its own. As a result, this location's gravity was totally turned off. And with that, these people begin to take to the skies. The power failure trapped Aurora in a big water bubble when she was in the pool. She was unable to escape. She was therefore internally suffocating. Her health was deteriorating, but her life would have ended before then. The ship is now restarting because the electricity is restored. Aurora exits the water at the same moment as this. Jim returns to his bed after taking off. Following this, they begin to notice AI system issues. He discovered that the ship is beset with numerous issues. These individuals had now arrived at the location of the power supply, where all of the electricity was stored. However, the head likewise turns unconscious after arriving here. Now that his entire body has been scanned, the head was discovered to have 612 illnesses. His tissues are gradually running out as a result. That is, he will pass away eventually. With this knowledge of himself, the head became very depressed. He places them both beside him and says, "Listen to me, look out for each other, and live a loving life." In order to allow them to stop here and do anything, he also provides them his ID. And that's when the unfortunate guy passes away. Jim and Aurora left his body there and continued to work on the ship's issues. However, all of a sudden, there was a huge issue that affected everything around them. The robot had an issue to the point where it was injuring itself. When Aurora notices this, it moves swiftly to close the system. Subsequently, the two proceeded once more and began altering every component of the spacecraft. They exited the power supply room after completing this. There was a large hole within the door as soon as they opened it, which the two begin to pull in that direction. However, they restrain themselves and seal the opening. They discovered there are numerous other holes like that in the ship after taking care of themselves. And now as they were getting close to the main electrical supply system, they discovered that the entire electrical system was damaged. That's the reason they start replacing all the pieces so quickly. However, as a result of the damage, the spaceship begins to heat up. They pulled the lever to remove it. However, the gate remains closed. And now there will be an explosion here if the heat is not removed quickly. When Jim realized this, he changed into his costume, and he begins to move to the side where the heat extraction was necessary. The interior of the ship was much hotter now. Everything heats up quickly. Jim pulls the lever from outside at that point. As a result, the door opened, but the door closed again the moment he took his hand off the lever. Jim saw this and realized that he would need to hold the lever if the door needed to be kept open. He pushes the lever and assumes the risk. As a result, the door opened. When he's finished, He instructs Aurora to swiftly pull the lever to release the heat. She won't do this though, since she wants for Jim to have no negative outcomes. Aurora needed to pull the lever, even if she doesn't want to, because the spaceship's temperature was steadily rising. This is how I start to touch Jim and release all the heat. However, Jim tripped and fell. He began to descend with such force that the safety wire fastened to his torso broke. Jim was still in space, but the ship was doing good now. His clothing has a hole in it, and here he was, escaping the spacecraft. Aurora now dons a suit and emerges to save him. She could see Jim, but he was a long distance away. Aurora attempts to get through to him though. Additionally, the two held hands. However, they parted ways once more due to a hand slip. However, she later notices the cable that Jim had hooked to it. She grabs this wire and immediately spins it in her direction. She then took him inside the spacecraft. Jim's suit was burning now. As a result of spending so much time in space, his health also declines. Aurora was frightened to see this. She places his suit inside the medical device after removing it. She gives the machine the command to run all of its programs simultaneously on Jim. The moment this occurs, the machine begins treating Jim concurrently. However, his condition has not changed. Fortunately, Jim's eyes open after a little period. Aurora is overjoyed to see this. Jim's condition improves, and they both fix the entire spaceship at that point. Subsequently, they dress the head's corpse with care and attached a badge on it, and the spaceship leaves him there. Jim now has access to a second bedroom, which was perfect. One of the two could fall asleep in it. He instructs Aurora to return and lie down because of this, but Aurora says no, won't let him. No, I'm not going to abandon you. Together, we shall reside. They stay here for a few more years, where Aurora receives that ring from Jim one day, which she puts on and feels overjoyed. And now, 90 years later, we see the present, when that spacecraft arrived to the planet at last. Put it another way, until its end, all of the participants awaken from slumber as soon as this occurs. However, as they began to disembark from the spacecraft, they discovered that plants had been grown throughout, which Jim and Aurora had developed, but they had passed away because so many years had passed. Still, they accomplished a great deal of good by fixing the spaceship. These people couldn't go to their destination until then. And with this, the story ends here.